Hey there, Average Joes. Welcome back to the Eternal Struggle. I'm your average host, Jaymang. Joining me today, again, is my taller than average co-host, Tall Shark and Handsome. How you doing today, Shark?
I'm pretty good. I'm kind of exhausted from work, but I'm ready to switch my brain from work mode to eternal mode. How about you?
I'm doing pretty all right. Very long start to the week, but I'm kind of taking a little bit of time right now leading into Eternal. I've been a little tilted the last few days, but that's not going to stop me from enjoying this cast.
Yeah, definitely. I thought you were going to say like, but that's not going to stop. So let's keep going.
Yeah, we'll just hammer on through. So tell me about your week in Eternal, Shark.
So for this week, I'm going back to school right now, so I haven't had a lot of like free time to stream or really play Eternal much. Usually play while I'm falling asleep, and that causes me to lose ranks. But this weekend, I did my first ever campaign on stream, and I ended up just going full diamond. Blowing all the money there right up front. Not even money, influence. And people really enjoyed the cameo when Mrs. Shark and her friend came home, and we were all very drunk on stream again. But we played a bunch of ranked, and then we did some drafting, and the rest is kind of a blur. uh, and just a quick mention for anybody out there who's collecting stats on streamer influence. I started out with 293,000 influence. That's 293,000. And my first stream after the influence store came out, I gained 7,000. And I had about 250 viewers. So, I don't know what the rank is for that, but if you want to do some math, you can. And after Sunday's stream, where I had, I think my peak was just above 900 viewers, I gained 27,000 back, uh, which is
Wow.
really cool. So I gained a little less than a third of the 90,000 that I spent on the Diamond campaign back. And I don't have the exact numbers, but that's about as close as I can get right at the moment.
Wow.
Now, yeah, I mean, I think that's good, and I think somebody out there is definitely going to be crunching the numbers. Probably Apocalypse or Poetic Discord if you watch them in Twitch. Now, as for what I've been playing in Eternal, I've been doing some testing for a big event that's happening this weekend, which we'll get into a little bit later. I've dusted off my our old JPS Blitz list. I've spent almost all of my Shiftstone that I had left making it completely premium. I've never had a completely premium deck before, and it's so cool. I feel like I play the deck enough that it's a great investment just to have it completely premium. How about you? How's your week been?
So as far as Eternal is gone, I've had a pretty poor week in Eternal. I feel like I'm not seeing a whole lot of success on ladder with just about any deck that I've been playing. The last few times that I've got on, I just feel like I tilted. I know we went over tilt last episode. I've tilted pretty quickly on pretty much every occasion that I've launched the game. Other than my last session, I will say that I did enjoy the games that I played last night. I'm trying to take a step back and not focus so hard on the grind and focus more on learning some decks that I haven't been playing or played before. Because I'm frankly quite burnt out on FJS. The deck is boring, is probably the best explanation that I can come up with, because which we'll be getting to later, I feel like the play pattern of the deck is very similar for between games. Like, I feel like because there's so many smugglers in the deck that most of the time you're doing pretty much the same thing every game, and that kind of play pattern just gets kind of old for me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but I'm working on getting better with Reanimator. I don't believe that it's as busted as some people have been saying, but I do think it's a very powerful deck that maybe suffers a little bit from consistency issues.
Right. I mean, any combo deck will do that. And I think the people who are complaining about Reanimator are the people who are getting beaten by it, not the people who are actually playing it and winning maybe 50% of their matches.
Oh, for sure. I think that combo is that archetype that when you lose to a combo deck, tends to feel a lot worse than when you lose to a more mid-range style strategy. So typically people will complain a little bit louder because they're losing to a combo deck like Reanimator than if they're losing to FTP or, you know, FJS, even though people are still going to complain about FJS all the time.
That's very true.
So quickly, I just wanted to go over for everybody. We're only going over 2 topics this week, but our second topic we're going to go very, very in depth about. If you haven't gotten the clue from the title of the podcast this week, A Trip to the Market, we're going to be talking pretty in depth about markets, smugglers, and their effect on Eternal. First, we're going to talk about the ETS this week, and that was won by Kamado playing Chainbray.
Yeah, congrats to him, man. Good job making it to number 1 yet again. You can actually find him streaming as well sometimes at twitch.tv/CAMAT0. Kamato.
Yeah, it's insane how consistent Kamado has been lately. He's really been on a tear. He's been doing good in the ETS, the EC, or I'm sorry, not the ECL, the ECQs. Although, does he play the ECL? Do you know?
I haven't really seen him do it much. Maybe if there was an invitational, he probably would be, but I feel like he leans more towards the ETS instead.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he was tearing it up there. He's a very, very good player.
Yeah.
So one thing of note that I wanted to mention from this top 8 is that of the 8 decks in the top 8, not a single one was the same as another one.
Oh yeah, there was no duplicates. That's really cool. It's actually huge. There's usually like a single archetype or deck that's completely dominating, but this meta has actually felt pretty stable and kind of open. And I'm actually wildly surprised that Reanimator didn't make it into the top 8.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I actually think that the Reanimator deck suffers from a little bit of consistency issue on top of the fact that it has a target on its head now.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure that you'll be able to see all the graveyard or the void hate in all the markets and such.
All the gavels, yeah, I'm sure I didn't crunch the numbers, but I'm sure there's a handful of gavels in there. Another thing that I wanted to mention about this is that in a way, this kind of suggests that we have a pretty open, diverse meta in one way, at least. We're seeing a lot of different decks. However, something that I did notice when going through these top 8 decks that suggests that maybe it's not as diverse as we want to think. 4 of the 8 decks in the top 8 had 8 copies of either merchants or smugglers in their deck, whereas one deck actually had 0 merchants, which is, as far as I know, the first time that we've seen this in set 5.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of huge statistics. Half of the people are running 8 merchants, the other half are running at least 4, except for this one crazy guy who's running 0. It kind of raises the question, like, is it even possible to stay competitive without merchants? And I mean, clearly what is his name? Pupicitus? Yeah, Pupicitus did it with his Time Justice Primal Aggro list, but out of the last 5 big tournaments, the ECL, the ETS, and any non-casual events, he's the only one out of all 5 of the last big tournaments to not run any type of merchants in the top 8. Maybe that's actually the dominating archetype. It's not a specific deck, but it's a play style.
Yeah, that actually brings us to our next topic, which I had teased a little bit earlier, is that we're going to talk about markets and how markets have affected Eternal. So first off, let's start off with what exactly do markets add to Eternal by existing?
It allows silver bullet answers to exist so that other cards like good relics can also exist. So for those of you who may not know, a silver bullet is what you would use to kill a werewolf. Like if we're talking not exactly real life, but in more real world terminology. So it's not necessarily what you'd want if you were going to be facing an army of robots, but it does a really good job of killing a werewolf. It's a term used to denote a specific card that can answer a very specific threat, but it's one that you don't necessarily want to draw every game. In Magic, you'd see a lot of one-ofs of a card in a deck that were specifically geared to specific other decks that they thought were in the meta, and you'd go and search for them with very specific cards. Now, for example, in Eternal, Martyr's Chains is absolutely bonkers. Doubling your units every turn, destroying an opponent's unit whenever you play a power. It's bonkers. And so is Pit of Lenecta. But there's a slew of silver bullet answers, like Bore for fire, Vision of Austerity for justice or primal, Disjunction in time, and Burglarize in shadow. And you don't have to even playing them in your main deck, clogging up your hand in matchups where you don't want them. It allows these broken cards to exist because you can answer them when you need to by going to the market.
Yeah, it's very important because it keeps those fringe strategies that are very powerful. For instance, Reanimator, which is maybe not necessarily a fringe strategy right now, but at times in the past it's been a fringe strategy that you can have an answer in your market that you don't ever want to really see in any other matchup. For instance, Gavel. Gavel is not a card that you want to see very often, but it's very good in those corner cases. And as you mentioned earlier, Bore, which is everybody's favorite example as a silver bullet card, helps keep certain cards such as Chains or Pit from absolutely breaking the format and requiring people to play multiple cards such as Bore in their main deck that could be dead in a lot of matchups.
Yeah, and I think that Bore single-handedly is the card that is keeping any relic-based strategy at bay. Like I was playing with Sunnyvale, and we were testing out a Severin list that ran like rat cages and a whole bunch of just different like relics. And anytime I ran into a Bore, I would just lose like automatically. But anytime I didn't, I could snowball out of control, and they didn't really have an answer.
Yeah, Bore is definitely a very efficient answer to pretty much any relic or weapon style deck.
Yeah, definitely.
So another thing that our markets add to Eternal is consistency. Consistency is a huge factor that markets are adding to the game that allow players, instead of just playing silver bullets in their markets, they can also play cards that they want to see the most often.
Right, exactly. Consistency is basically the act of getting your deck to execute its game plan, every time. If you want to be super consistent, for example, in a combo deck, you can run your combo cards in your market, which will, allow you to draw those important cards when you go to the market, in addition to the times when you draw the other 3 copies that are in your main board. And you can easily see this strategy in Haunted Highway. They usually play Madness, Combust, Vicious Highwayman, Bandit Queen, and Haunting Scream as their market, which are all cards that they play in the main board too.
Yeah, and another good example, I know that I keep going back to it, but in Reanimator, it's adding the copies, what I would say 4 through 7, to the deck of its reanimation spell, which it really only has 1. So the deck really, in order to operate, needs those extra slots in order to get and execute its plan. And then on the other side of the coin, you've got decks like FJS, where what they want to do is efficiently remove threats and execute their late game plans. So they will play some amount of either removal, or they'll play plate, and most often they'll play sites in their board to allow, in their market. That's a little magic terminology. They'll play sites from their market into play consistently because the sites are very powerful, but more often than not, you really only want to see 1, maybe 2 at most.
Yeah, and I've played a little bit of FJS myself, and usually if I don't know exactly what my opponent is on, the site is what I'll go for 9 times out of 10. But if I already know what they're playing, I will preemptively go and get a card from my market to deal with whatever they're doing.
Yes, for sure. And that brings another point, that markets add a lot more decisions for players to make to the game.
Oh yeah, exactly. So like, do you want to go for something proactive? Do you want to be the aggressor and have them try to find an answer for you? Do you want to plan ahead for something that you think your opponent is doing? Like if you think they're on Reanimator, do you want to go get your Gavel? Or do you want to put this, this huge, very expensive unit that's in your hand back into your market for later, and then go get like the power that you need to play all these other cards in your hand? There's a lot of decisions that you can make with markets.
Yeah, these decisions tend to help the more consistent and better players stand out a little bit more from your average player like us.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so next I want to talk a little bit about the original 5 merchants. First, I want to hear what your thoughts personally are on the original five.
I think they're good. They three of them had to be nerfed. The Justice one, the Winchest merchant, the 2/2 flyer, does seem to be far and away the worst body wise. But other than that, they all kind of seem to fit the strategies of the decks that they slide into, at least at the time that they were printed. And I think it was a really cool way for Direwolf Digital to kind of get around the people calling for sideboards. Because before we actually had the merchants, we were running tournaments where you had a 15 card sideboard like you do in Magic. And now there's no sideboards because everyone has a market instead.
Yeah, I definitely think that the markets added a really neat and unique element to the game. It may not be entirely unique because in Magic there are wish cards that do effectively the same thing with some restrictions, but it allows this game specifically to exist in a single game format, which is, I mean, about 95% of games that you're going to play in Eternal are best ones. And as far as the units go themselves, they were very strong before nerfs. I do believe that the Primal Merchant nerf really hurt the Blitz deck that we were playing, because the Primal Merchant was a real threat, even as a 3/2. The Red Merchant, the Fire Merchant, was also at a 3/3, could effectively block so many different things. And then the Time Merchant as a 1/4 just stonewalled aggro, which was in a lot of cases Time's worst enemy. So they did require some nerfs, and I do think that they're quite balanced at this point.
Oh, totally agreed. Yeah, the Aurelian Merchant was definitely the biggest offender, being a 1/4, being able to chump block an Oni Ronin and kill it, while completely stopping their onslaught of units.
So I think most people that are listening know how these original merchants feel in the current meta, but back in set 4, how did they feel to you? Were they too powerful? Were they just fine?
Well, back in set 4, it was a much different time. Like, the merchants were new, kind of, at least in the beginning. There was a lot of toying with decks, that wanted markets versus decks that didn't. There were some Skycrag decks that played no merchants because they just specifically wanted to be burn as fast as they can, and that was their consistency plan. They didn't want to waste their turn 3 going to the market. But then there's on the flip side of the coin, I think Enraush is the first person to have run more than 4 merchants, and he was running just 2 different colors of merchants, and because he thought that they were super powerful. And I mean, as we've seen right now in recent trends, now that there's up to 10 different merchants with hopefully 5 more to go, it's kind of difficult to rise up and play without them, because no matter what factions you're playing, there's a merchant that fits your play style now. And so there's almost no reason not to be playing a merchant right now.
Yeah, most certainly. Enrash was definitely a man before his time, because he came up with the idea before people thought that it was something that was good. And nowadays we're seeing so many decks where running more than 4 merchants is kind of the norm now, because of the consistency factor, not to mention just how powerful the smugglers are. We'll get to that in a little bit. But I think that before set 5 came out, the merchants felt a lot more, the original 5 merchants, I should say, felt a lot more powerful than they do nowadays, because we now can compare their bodies to what we're seeing in the smugglers. And a lot of the smugglers are just very powerful bodies, not to mention the fact that being 2 factions, they have the flexibility of hitting a lot of different cards that the merchants just can't hit.
Right, exactly.
But the drawback to, well, the supposed drawback to running the smugglers is the black market versus the regular market.
Yeah, I think black markets are a super creative way to get cards that wouldn't normally see play into like the top players' decks. I never thought I would see somebody playing Torrential Downpour in the top 4 of an ETS. But the second place player had it. Pythias, he had it in their market, and it lets some draft chaff cards get their time in the limelight.
Yeah, it definitely lets the much more lower power cards that have a little more of a niche application have their limelight and stick out and be able to see play. And I do like that. And I do think that the black market was a smart idea as far as trying to balance the power of being able to both get two different factions as well as having a bigger body, or well, I shouldn't say bigger, a more powerful body on most of the smugglers or effect.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
So from there, why don't we go ahead and start talking about the smugglers themselves? So what do you think of the power level of the smugglers?
I think that the units themselves are much more powerful in terms of like the bodies and the abilities. Like giving one of them double strike is bonkers to me. The giving, making a 2/3 with life steal can just really shore up the board. There's one of them that can be a 4/4. They're just much better in terms of bodies and abilities. But that does come with the very real drawback of not being able to gain the consistency that you want to from regular markets. Like you can't use these as numbers 4 through 7 of your best cards. You have to use them as silver bullet answers.
Or you could use it to stack up on one type of card. I'll use the example of FJS here. You can play your 4 Slays and then relegate your 2 of Vanquish to 1 of in your black market, which really, I mean, you've got 8 smugglers in that deck. All 8 of them can hit your Vanquish. How, if you do the math, which I'm not going to do off the cuff right now, you're much more likely to have access to that 1 Vanquish than you are to one of those 2 Vanquishes in your 75.
That's very true. The only problem there becomes, once you've used your Vanquish, then what do you get from your market if you need that Vanquish again? That's what I mean by the consistency. Like if you for a combo deck, you want to be playing the merchants to go get your like the Carrington merchant in Reanimator, you want to go get your reanimate spell. What is that called? Grasping at shadows or grasp?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, the reanimator spell. And you couldn't really play that card in your market if you were playing a smuggler, because you need to be able to draw. There's only one reanimate spell like that, and you want the 3 in your main and be able to get it again with your merchants.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think that mostly just applies to the niche strategies that require a very specific card. But when we're talking about strategies that are more tempo or control oriented, there are enough removal spells printed in the format, especially when you're spread across 3 different factions, that you almost have that consistency just because there's so many options available. I mean, we still have Avigraft. I know that it got nerfed and costs 1 more, but that really, in my opinion, doesn't make that card a whole lot worse. It makes it less likely to play more than 1 copy, but it's still a very powerful effect and card.
Yeah, and I do like the point you brought up about playing 3 different colors. When you have a black market, you're only able to get cards that are not in your main deck. There's a lot of cards that you just can't fit into your main deck when you're playing 3 factions, especially if you're just playing 3 faction good stuff like kind of like FJS is. It's just like the best cards, the most value cards in those 3 colors, and it hurts sometimes the cuts that you have to make from your deck. But playing a black market, you can definitely have answers to cards that you normally wouldn't, but then you can play, one of those painful cuts in the market. Like, for example, Regent's Tomb or Avigraft. Those would show up in your market rather than playing them in your main deck, because they're still super good cards, but you don't necessarily don't necessarily want them in your main.
Yeah, and I do think that like when you are playing 8 merchants that can reach that 1 card, as long as you can develop a game plan where you either get enough value off of said card, or you want only 1 for any given game, you can hit that card way more consistently than you ever could have if you played 4 in your main.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So from there, I do want us to spend a little bit of time on the rise of the 8 merchant and smuggler meta. It's something that we've been seeing for a little bit now, and it's frankly starting to become the norm.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think right now we're definitely seeing a shift from, like I was talking about before, when we were in set four, you're either playing zero merchants or you're playing four. Whereas now you're either playing four merchants or you're playing eight. We're kind of testing out the waters to see how high we can go. I would not be surprised if Enroush did something crazy and started playing 12.
Yeah, I mean, we're actually just getting to the point in the game where if you're running three factions that are supported by smugglers slash merchants, it just seems unequivocally wrong, unless you're playing a niche strategy, to be playing any less than eight, because there's just so much good removal in the game spread out across multiple factions that you can make a black market work and you can increase the consistency of your deck.
Yeah, what's crazy to me is that I think for FJS, you could literally be running 20 merchants right now. You could be running you could be running the single color merchants for Fire, Justice, and Shadow, and then you could be running the two smugglers that fit between those two colors. So you could be running 20 merchants and just have a whole bunch of stuff that gains value off that. Now, where's kind of the line where you're like, okay, I have 20 cards that cost 3 in my deck, what else am I doing here? And whereas the what are you putting into your market versus what are you getting out of it?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely got to be a line there where there is too many. And we may not actually see that line get pushed until the next set comes out, when we get the other half, presumably get the other half of the smuggler cycle.
Yeah, and I think that in my head, I just came up with an idea for a crown deck, a crown of possibilities
Of
deck that
course.
just runs a million merchants, and you keep putting these echo units into your market and taking them out and putting them back in and taking them out, getting all these abilities. I think it'd be terrible, but it's something that Logo Poju would do.
That I actually like that idea. That's pretty neat. Okay, so we'll go into our next subtopic about markets, and that is the production of similar play patterns as a result of playing eight merchants slash smugglers. So when we see a lot of merchants, we tend to see a lot of play patterns that are very similar game to game. As an example that I've used earlier, FJS tends to have a very similar play pattern turns 1 through 4 fairly often, because if you have one of your smugglers on turn 3 and you don't have an immediate need, which very rarely do you have an immediate need to hit a removal spell off of your smuggler that early in a game, you're getting your sight and you're playing your sight, and that just seems to happen in 80% of the games that you play with the deck.
Yeah, and with a lot of merchants, you see people trying to guess what their opponent is playing by turn 3, and some decks you just can't really guess. If for example, if it was you playing versus, maybe not me because you'd know that I was on Blitz, but if you were playing against somebody else playing my Blitz list, it can kind of lead to an interesting mind game sort of thing. Where the first player might play their cards a little bit differently to make the opponent think that they're on one deck, and then after the opponent plays as their merchant, they play the deck like it's supposed to be. For like example, if I was playing my Justice, Primal, Shadow, Blitz list, that's the same colors as the Reanimate list. As long as I didn't play power, like if I didn't, so because the Reanimator plays Privilege of Rank, they do play a whole bunch of Justice sigils, but they don't actually play any dual color Justice cards because they don't need to cast it really. So as long as I didn't play any Justice cards or any Justice seats, my opponent might think that by turn 3 I'm on Reanimator if I'm playing, like a Crest or a Seat, and not playing my Diplomatic Seal. If I kind of hide that to hide the fact that I'm an aggressive deck, my opponent might think that I'm on Reanimator, and then their first market card would go and get their gavel. But it won't be until I play my unit that they realize that they've made a mistake, and that's kind of like the mind game that you can do.
Okay, so that's interesting. Do you think that this production of similar play patterns is a good or a bad thing?
I mean, it really depends on the player, really. Like, you have gotten very, very good at playing Fire Justice Shadow, but you're kind of getting burnt out on it, which, some players may not be getting burnt out on it. Some players might see that as just like, what, I've played 1,000 games of this. I'm ready to learn another deck, that kind of thing. I think it brings about changes in the meta. So like people get sick of playing the same deck unless it's clear and like far and away the best deck. And yeah, I think the enjoyment comes from winning, but also from, playing well.
Okay, so you're saying that for the people who have a competitive attitude, they may enjoy it a lot more because they can produce these similar patterns reliably. But somebody who maybe is trying to get a little bit of variance into their game. I know that variance may not be the best word there, but seeing a little bit of a different game every time may not enjoy the fact that the best deck or the better decks in the format require this production of similar play patterns.
Right, exactly. Like some people might want to be running, their favorite 3 units in their market, and they don't want to always go get the same thing. Like I know myself, I would get sick of just going and getting that site every game. Just turn 1, play a land, turn 2, play a seek power, turn 3, go use my merchant to go get the site, turn 4, play site. Like, okay, I can do that in my sleep now.
Yeah, so personally, I think that on both sides of the coin, both being on the receiving end and on the playing end of a situation where you have similar play patterns, does not encourage very fun gameplay. I actually think that it makes the game a little more boring because the reason that card games tend to be so enjoyable is because there is that degree of variance that you're going to get in between uh, the games that you play. One game should look different than another game when you're playing against the same deck with the same deck. You shouldn't have to have the same game played out every single time.
Yeah, like you have a game plan. Like for example, Blitz wants to beat face by surprising you with some pump spells. Now, I'm not always going to be hitting you with a berserked Geomar on turn 4 or turn 5 and going for the game that way, because sometimes you'll have a removal spell, or sometimes I won't draw Geomar, or sometimes he won't have berserk. Sometimes I have to make do with a Coastal Battle Mage or with a Rilgon's Disciple or something else, But the idea is that we're playing enough of these, like, these units that get bonuses when you buff them, that, the strategy still happens as many games as possible. So yeah, you'll still have the game plan, but it won't be exactly the same every time, like it is when you go and get that that site from your market on turn 4.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that because I do want to say that even if the end result feels like the same, the journey from point A to point B, I think, is what really determines whether or not you're seeing similar play patterns. In FJS, when you're doing the smuggler on turn 3 and decide on turn 4, that's not really very often what is winning you the game. It's just part of that journey. And when you do that every single game, and your opponent is required to deal with that every single game, that just feels like a very similar play pattern. Whereas your example with Blitz, back when we were playing that in set 4, when I was playing it a lot more often, there were plenty of games there where I'm trying to bait my opponent into playing spells, or I'm just going for it. It's not the same every single game, even though a lot of the time the games end with a bunch of pump spells.
Right. Or them running us over.
Yeah, or that happening for sure. So quickly, I just want to discuss for a little bit about how we can reduce variance in the game without using merchants. And I think that the first and foremost is cantrips, good cantrips, which there are some good cantrips in the game already. We have Quarry, we have Strategize, and other various ways of filtering through our deck and finding the cards we want to find.
Oh man, yeah. And you know what? Levitating, coming back to a 1-cost card, was a boon for aggressive decks running Primal. It was huge. And I would love to see more 1-cost cantrips across all the other different colors too. I think they're a big part of what makes Magic the Gathering decks consistent. For example, anybody who plays Magic in at least Legacy, the Legacy format, would not play Strategize. It's a 2-cost. You draw 2 cards, put 1 on the bottom. No, thank you. They would much rather play, either Ponder, which draws, you look at the top 3, you can reorganize them or shuffle your deck and then draw a card, or they would play Brainstorm, which is draw 3 cards, put 2 cards from your hand back on top of your deck.
Yeah, I definitely think that a card similar to Preordain, which allows you to scout twice and then draw a card, or ponder, would be great to add to the game. But I'm sure a lot of the blue haters out there would disagree with us.
But yeah, I would love to see more cantrips at 1.
Yeah, another way that you can reduce the variance in the game is through mulligan changes, such as the recent mulligan. Well, it's fairly recent mulligan change where they added the extra mulligan.
Oh yeah, that third mulligan was great, and it definitely reduces the number of games where you just feel bad, where you have a bad hand, then you mulligan, and your hand is again bad. Though I mean, it's when you mulled a 6 and your hand is still bad after mulliganing before, then you may as well concede, and you feel super duper bad, and that's when Jay goes and tilts.
Yeah.
But that being said, the number of times that has happened to me has significantly dropped since the third mulligan was implemented.
Well, also, I think that one thing that people tend to forget about the game is that your mulligans give you 2 to 4 power, which actually reduces the variance that you're going to see in your mulligans, because a lot of people are playing the bare minimum power in the deck, because when you mulligan, you're very likely to hit the amount of power that you want to see between that and the cantrips that are in your deck, because nowadays, let's face it, most decks have some amount of cantrips in them, even if you want to consider, merchants or smugglers as a sort of pseudo cantrip.
Yeah, I can see that, definitely.
So, and then one other thing that I wanted to mention real quick about reducing variance is the implementation of limit changes on cards. As I just mentioned, power being limited to, you can only put a minimum of 25 into your deck, and such other things as having only 4 copies of any given card, or the black market, you're only allowed to have cards that aren't contained in your main deck.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about changing the limits to the number of power that you're playing. Like currently, you have to have at least 1/3 of your deck be power, and at most 2/3 of your deck be power. So sometimes you'll see those crazy combo decks that are trying to be super consistent by playing 50 power and then 25 other cards, so that when they mulligan, they definitely get some of those good cards, and then they kind of just base the rest of the game on only having those cards, because you're never going to see the other ones.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about these higher power decks that are trying to hit very specific cards often.
Oh yeah, and that's actually the first time that I ever saw Whispering Wind be used, because you discard one of your power cards that you have 50 of, and then you go and draw a card that is not a power, specifically not a power, because it has to cost more than the power.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought about that kind of strategy.
Yeah, but like, what happens if you're only required to play 20 power? You'd see people out there playing 20 power and then a bunch of seek powers, right? Especially with that mulligan rule there. And then changing the limits on the number of cards that the number of a specific card that you can have in play. They've done that a couple of times in Magic, I think, with very specific cards like Relentless Rats. It's star equal to the number of Relentless Rats that you have in play, and it's a card that you can have any number of in your deck. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, so that gives you some degree of consistency where you can have as many copies as you want. And then as a side note, you can reduce consistency of decks by limiting how many merchants a player can play. If you limited everybody to only 4 merchants, that would reduce the consistency of these 3 color piles that are running 8 merchants or smugglers.
That's very true. Yeah, and I think that goes into what we're going to talk about next with what changes to markets do we want to see? Like if we did put a limit on the number of merchants that we can play, I feel like that would be kind of clunky and an awkward fix to something that might not actually be an issue if this is the way that Direwolf Digital intended the game to go. If they want us to be using these markets in every deck, then that might be a kind of an awkward fix to us playing too many merchants, when that's what they wanted us to be doing, is playing merchants.
No, I'm a huge fan of the idea of limiting merchants personally. I think that when your deck is playing more than 4 merchants, it's just adding way too much consistency to decks, and that makes the game a little bit less interesting to me. I think that by playing more than four merchants, you're reducing the variance of your play patterns, especially in early turns of games. And then sometimes in late turns of games, it's just the one card that you need. If your opponent is empty-handed and you've got a merchant in hand, you can just wait until they do something and just stop it. And I'm not a big fan of having access to more than four silver bullet answers in your deck for any situation possibly. But that's my own personal opinion. I think that the limit is an interesting way of looking at trying to adjust or fix this, what I would call a problem in Eternal right now. But I'm sure that there's other ideas out there. For instance, there are possibility of having merchant interaction coming out in either the next campaign or set.
Okay, so you mean like cards that would interact with merchants or markets specifically, but that aren't merchants or markets themselves?
Yeah,
that's kinda...
sorry, very, very definitely. They are cards that would what we would call hate cards for merchants. Now, I know that people have been kind of randomly talking here and there about maybe like a sabotage that hits merchants or markets. But Misoppose on Reddit actually put out a really interesting list on a thread that was posted a few days ago that I kind of glanced over. But I thought that his post was particularly interesting about some ideas of ways to interact with merchants. And I'm just going to list them off real quick. So the first thing that Misoppose points out is that a card that could possibly kill a merchant or smuggler if they use the market. So maybe something similar to a gavel that attaches to your opponent, and whenever they play a merchant, the merchant will die if they access the market. So it's kind of like it doesn't absolutely keep them from hitting the market, but it does remove the creature when it enters play and uses the markets. I thought that's a pretty neat idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like I feel like Teacher of Humility was really the first merchant hate card, and it came out in the same set as the merchants. So I don't know. I feel like that would probably fit along these lines, right?
Oh, that's true. I actually didn't even think about that the disciplinary weights is sort of like a merchant hate card.
Yeah. What else does he got there?
So another idea was to steal a smuggler after they have used the market, such as they put in quotations here, a bribe. I thought that was kind of interesting. It's very much in the same vein of the first idea, which is you more or less interact with the creature or unit, I should say, and not the card that they're receiving from the market. So you get a little bit of value there. I don't really know if it's actually dealing with the issue, because I've always thought of the smugglers and merchants units as more of kind of like a bonus that you get to go into the market and also have a unit in play. So that's an interesting way of kind of like reducing the effectiveness of them.
Yeah, and another thing could be like if the next set of merchants said, go get a card from your market that fits these colors and then give this unit to your opponent.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Another one that they had listed here was a fast spell that interacts when the smuggler or merchant hits the market and gives them some sort of useless or less powerful card instead of what they had searched for.
No, that's a cool idea, except that it would completely change the way that the game works currently. The way that the game works currently is that you only get a window to respond when they are affecting a card on your end of the field. So if they are torching their own unit, you don't respond to that. If they are torching your unit, you can respond to that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that that's actually a feasible idea to apply to this game. Yeah. So another idea was to block the use of the market via some sort of either, I would assume, unit or relic, which is very similar to the first idea where that I had, where you drop a relic that interacts with them whenever they do something. So that seems kind of interesting. Not really sure exactly how much play something like that would get, except for if we actually got into a meta where we're seeing 8+ smugglers or merchants all the time.
Well, I mean, currently there's only one deck out of the last 5 tournaments that isn't using a market right now. I mean, I think something that blocks the use of a market would be huge, especially if you could go get it from your market. Maybe there will be cards that won't be able to be put into markets.
Hmm.
That'd be cool.
Oh, I read this as where it blocks all players, but I feel like because playing something like that where it only affects your opponent, that probably has a lot of potential of being just too good, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. It would stop your opponent from being able to go get their market, but if you got it from your market, you get to still do it. I can see.
So here's my favorite one. Their next idea was a punishing mechanic, which would, when your opponent uses the market, they either lose health or they gain life, such as the person that is playing the hate card, adds power, tokens, etc. Does some sort of punishing mechanic for them going into the market.
Yeah, and I think that's where disciplinary weights off of Teacher of Humility would fall. You know,
Oh yeah,
whenever
for sure.
they use the market, they have to increase the cost of the card by 2. It makes it almost unusable for the for like, because they're usually keeping, you know, that 4 cost unit that they're trying to get on curve, or you know, that big late game card that they now have to wait 2 extra turns to get there.
Yeah, just imagine if somebody plays a unit that says effectively whenever a player interacts with their market, or receives a card from their market, they take 5 damage or something along those lines. That seems possibly powerful in aggressive strategies.
Yeah, definitely.
I thought that's a great idea. Another one, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is a sabotage type card that would interact with the market. For this one, it's kind of hit or miss, because I think that it wouldn't be like, let's just take sabotage and imagine that it only hits the market. I just can't see that being a good card.
I feel like it would have to be modal, which means that you would be able to choose one. You know, currently we have those the displays where you get to choose one of those three effects. I feel like one of the displays could be, you know, discard a card from your opponent's market, or you know, swap this display with a card from your opponent's market. That would be cool.
Now, I will say that I love that idea. The only thing that I don't like about that idea is by giving one 3-color combination the ability to do that over all the others seems a little bit too powerful for a modal spell.
Right. And I mean, maybe it doesn't necessarily fit into the display theme, but even if it's just like a 2-cost shadow spell that says either, you know, destroy a unit that costs 3 or less, or discard a unit, or discard a card from your opponent's market that costs 3 or less, something like that.
I love it. I love that idea. I think that cards like that would be very interesting to see going forward, if they don't want to directly deal with the market. I'm sorry,
Right.
the merchants in general.
Yeah, and that's just like off the top of our head. Like, if we, it would definitely require some more testing, but.
Mm-hmm. So some other ideas for changes that we might or might not want to see with the markets is, what about the merchants and smugglers in general? Do we think that as units they should be a little bit weaker? Do you?
I don't necessarily think that they should be a little bit weaker. I think the smugglers themselves are a little bit stronger than the one color merchants, simply because it's easier to play a 1-color merchant because you can play it in any dual color or tricolor faction. Whereas with the smugglers, you have the problem of only having a black market as well. Now, that being said, you could make them a little bit weaker, which would make you not want to play them as much. The other thing is they all cost 3 right now. So if there's no other merchants that are going to cost anything other than 3, then that makes them weaker in and of itself, because you're clogging up your 3-drop slot. I mean, How many times have you wanted to put in another 3-drop into FJS, but you're already playing 6, or you're already playing 8 merchants, so you can only really fit one more 3-drop into the deck, right?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that of all of the current smugglers and merchants, I still think the Rakano one would be fine as a 1-2 just because double damage is such a powerful ability. I thought that because you're essentially giving Rakano a 4-2 that works really, really well with weapons and pump spells. And to me, that just seems like it's leaps and bounds better than anything else.
Well, I mean, Champion of Fury is a 4-2 on 2 for Skycrag. So I mean, it's there are comparable cards. You know, Rakano does give you the it's definitely not even in the same cycle, but you know that kind of precedent has already been set. Playing a 4-2 for 3 is fine.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying. I the main comparison I want to make is Champion of Fury is purely a card made for that, whereas your Rakano Smuggler is a way for you to find the best card out of 5 that you have in a market for any given situation, on top of being a pretty reasonable body. I mean, a 2-2 double damage is a fairly reasonable body, in my opinion, especially in a color combination that plays Deep Forge Plate. Push to talk.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Sorry, I had push to talk off.
You're fine. I can cut that.
All right.
All right.
I'll just start over here. Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Okay, and then so another idea that I came up with, I'm not sure if anybody else has also arrived at this, but this kind of derives from me as being a Magic player. But what if instead of merchants being units, what if they were just spells, essentially wishes? So let's say it's a spell that has some sort of effect. Let's say like a 3-cost torch that allows you to access your market, or even just being like a 2-cost spell that allows you to access your market, and that's all it does.
Yeah, I mean, in Magic the Gathering, there's a cycle of cards called Wishes from the set Judgment. You know, one of them is called Living Wish, where you pay 1 in a green, which in this case would be Justice, and
Time.
you remove the card itself from the game, so you put it into your market, and then you go get either a unit or land or power from your market and put it into your hand. So you're swapping the card from your hand with the card in your market.
Yeah, so I thought that, maybe I'm sure that the designers for Eternal didn't want to exactly be on the same sort of playing field as the Wishes. So, I mean, the units, they make sense, to be honest, for the game Eternal. I just figured maybe the spells would be a little bit more, I guess, what I perceive as balanced. I don't think that merchants and markets are inherently broken. I just think that in their current form, they're very easy to abuse.
Yeah, and I feel like further on down the line, once we get the the next 5 smugglers, the ones for the other factions that we don't have yet, we might even see cards like a relic that goes in and is repeatable market effect. You know, it might be super duper expensive, but it'd be a cool design space, or even a power that says increase the power of one of your reduce the cost of one of the cards in your market, or something. There's a lot of design space there.
Yeah, I loved it, and I love the design space for the market. It's just got some fallbacks when you are able to shove like 8+ merchants into a deck and not have it really affect your strategy, I should say, in a negative way.
Totally.
So another idea for an adjustment is, I know that I keep coming back to FJS, but one of the most common plays for FJS is to get the Tormod's Crypt out. What if sometime in the future they prevented certain types of cards being marketable? For instance, sites.
Right, or even if the merchant just says, go and get a unit from your market, or go and get a spell from your market.
Yeah, and that would put it a lot more along the lines of like wish cards from Magic, which I actually really like that idea. We don't necessarily have to be constrained by faction.
Yeah, exactly. I like that too.
Yeah. Okay. So I figure we could take this episode to go ahead and give what you and I came up with as our guesses for what could be the next five smugglers.
Yeah, so you and I did that like little teaser for ourselves in my Discord here, and I think we both came up with pretty much identical lists of what we wanted them to be or what we thought they would be. We thought that Huru, which is the Justice and Primal merchant, would be a 2/1 Berserk unit. I mean, I can only hope, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because that would fit all of our Berserk lists, all of our Blitz lists, just perfectly. And then for Praxis, which is one that we don't have yet, the Fire Time one, that I think would be a 3/3 with Warp. Now, originally we thought it might be a 2/2, but then after thinking about it, like the Justice Merchant is a 2/2 flying, and it is clearly the worst. I think a 2/2 Warp would be even worse than that.
Oh, for sure.
I think a 3/3 kind of fits that a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree.
Then for Stone Scar, which is the Shadow Fire, we thought a 3/2 quick draw would really fit just easily there. Quick draw is an effect that's used a lot in both in Stone Scar units a lot. And then for Cambrai, which is the Time Justice, we thought there was a couple of different options that we thought it could be. We thought it could be a 2/2 with Endurance, or a 2/2 with Empower, where whenever you play a spell, it gets some buff until end of turn, like maybe +2/+0 until end of turn or something. Turn it into an attacker. And then for Feln, which is the Shadow Primal, we thought a 1/3 unblockable would be pretty easy. It would fit along the lines of Shadow Mage Infiltrator from Magic.
Yeah, it seems like it would shoehorn into that faction pretty well. So
definitely.
let us know if you guys have any guesses on what you think that the next five smugglers are going to look like. Because honestly, I think that that's just a fun exercise to try and come up with and see how close we all get. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about like your personal feelings on markets before we move into the streamer of the week?
I haven't really noticed them myself being super oppressive, but I have seen a lot of talk about it on Reddit and in Twitch and in Discord and everything. So I do know that the sentiments are out there that some people really dislike markets, but I think it really changes things. I mean, it's just something that's different about this game than in pretty much any other game. I know that Braxifen, one of my favorite streamers, he has pretty much given up Eternal at the moment because he doesn't like the way that the game is going with the smugglers.
Yeah, I personally won't go that far. Like, I still very much enjoy the game, even though I've recently been tilting into oblivion playing it. But I agree. I think that the smugglers were a very neat idea, but I think that in the current form of how smugglers and markets are designed, that we're looking at what I would call a failure of game design. I think that it's a wonderful idea that could use a little bit of adjustments, and I'm not going to claim that I know what the best adjustments would be for that, but I will say that I think that the ability to play 8 smugglers and not have the black market stipulation be a negative effect is not a good thing. I think that the real issue is that there is a lot of consistency across cards in the game, and it's not necessarily the market's fault that it's so easy to play so much removal or various types of strategy. Let's say like for Skycrag colors, you have a lot of burn spells that just interact super well with the smugglers from those factions. I just think that there's a lot of repetitive cards that do very similar things that allow the black markets to not be a problem or a drawback. And I think that by playing 8 smugglers, you're just producing very similar board states every single game, and that kind of like drains a little bit of fun out of the game personally.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
All right. Let us all know what you guys think. I know that there was already a really long thread about this, and I tried to read through all of it, but there's a lot of comments there, and there's only just so much time that I have during the day to read that stuff. But it was a very, very good read, and I just want to send a thank you to Miss Post because those were some pretty interesting ideas for us to go over.
Yeah, and we'll definitely include a link to that in the description of.
Yes, please see the description for that link. And then from there, let's go into the streamer of the week, and I'm going to let Shark take over this one.
I am so excited about this streamer of the week. Streamer of the week is nroush1. You heard us talking about him earlier. You can find him at twitch.tv /nroush NRAUSCH, then the number 1. He is actually I think he was the first person that I actually had on my stream. He did a draft with me simultaneously, and that was super fun back when I was first starting. And he is actually doing a charity event. He is doing a charity event, a 24-hour stream this upcoming weekend. It starts on Saturday, the 23rd at 5 p.m., and it ends on Sunday, the 24th at 5 p.m. His charity of choice is going to be the Ronald McDonald House Charities. He said that they really helped out his family when he was younger, and he would love to give back to them. Now, the cool thing about this charity stream is that there's going to be 3 other streamers making cameo appearances. Bassoon Buffoon, who was, I think, our week 1 streamer of the week. He's going to be casting a pauper tournament with nroush, which they put together themselves. And, they're using the Kalari's website, the eternaltournaments.com to run it. And then there's going to be this stupid guy, TallSharkandHandsome.
What an idiot. Bullcut.
I know. What yeah, he and I are going to be doing races with our blitz decks because we both had very similar ideas with blitz decks. We're both going to try and make it to a specific number of damage that we deal to our opponents, and try to be the first one there. The winner has the loser has to gift a tier 2 subscription to their channel to the loser, which I think is going to be cool.
That's great.
And then the third streamer is Grimfan. You guys may also know him. I'm pretty sure that we've mentioned him a million times here. He's going to be doing some stipulation drafts with him, which is going to be really cool. I've seen stipulation drafts where it's like whoever's wearing the best hat, whoever's got the best beard, only cards that are rare or must run at least 10 of your rares when you do a rare draft, that kind of thing.
Mustaches only.
Yeah, mustaches only. But yeah, there's gonna be a lot of cool stuff. I expect him to get well over 1,000 views. He's going to be running both a diamond campaign and a gold campaign because he's going across 2 different days. He's also going to be getting his league matches in. He's going to be doing some donation decks. So if you do a donation, he'll play whatever deck that you want to give. If you want to give a deck, you don't have to. And then he's going to have Mrs. Roush do a draft with him, which he's done before, and it's always super fun to have the chat troll her. Just tell her like, oh, this card costs 6. That means it's way better than this 2 drop that he probably needs.
That's great. Definitely go check that out, guys. And while you're over there, on behalf of the podcast, I'm going to be giving away a Dead Cells key, which is a platformer game that Tall Shark and Handsome and I very much enjoy, and we use to relax or, I don't know, rage if you're that kind of person. And I do not know exactly what nroush has decided to do with that, but please head over, and I'm sure that he'll mention it. It's possible that it's a donation stipulation. But I mean, this is a $25 value, so make sure you get those donations in and get it because the game is awesome.
It's so good. It's super duper good. It's what I use when I get tilted. I just like, you know what? I'm done with this game. I'm going to play this instead. And I just go play that.
Yeah. So definitely please go check out that charity. It's for a good cause, and Inrush is a great guy.
Definitely.
All right. So if you have any questions or topic suggestions for us to talk about on the next episode, I'd like to get back to some smaller topics. I know that today was very, very much long about markets. Please leave. Yeah, today was definitely a doozy. A little bit more structured than we've usually done. Please leave a comment on either the Reddit thread or the YouTube page or anywhere that you may find Tall Shark and Handsome and I, and we'll make sure that it gets to the appropriate place so that we can look at it and possibly include it on a future episode. So definitely. Shark, where can they find you?
All right. You can find me on at twitch.tv/TallSharkandHandsome. You can find me on Reddit under the username TallSharkandHandsome. You can find me on Discord. I have my own I have my own channel in Discord, which we'll put a link to in the description. And I've also got on Twitter, I'm at Shark and Tall because Tall Shark and Handsome didn't fit. How about you, Jay?
You can find me on Reddit at JOSU. You can find me, I believe, on Twitter at JOSU as well. I'm not very active, so don't expect anything there. You can find me on Discord as Jaymang. I'm on the Eternal Discord, Bassoon Buffoon's Discord, and Tall Shark and Handsome's Discord. And then I just opened up a page for the podcast on Facebook. So please search for it there and like it. And I'm going to try to make sure to keep that up to date with when episodes go live. And if you are listening to this via YouTube or a direct link from the Reddit, we are available now on Google Play and Stitcher, and we should be on iTunes soon. Oh, we're also on Spotify. So one of those 4 locations, you should be able to find us.
Sweet.
So hit that subscribe button, leave a positive review, please. If you don't like us, don't listen.
Yeah, and you know what? This one doesn't even cost $5 for you to subscribe. It's way easier than Twitch.
So thanks for listening, guys. Stay average.